Thank you for joining today's presentation, hosted by Pathlock, the market leader in access orchestration. My name is Mike Peterbaugh, and I'm the CMO here at Pathlock, and I'm really excited to introduce the topic and especially our speaker today. First, the topic. Today, we're going to discuss a topic that continues to be an area of interest for our customer and user community, and that's the idea of setting themselves up for success when it comes to access governance and their migration to SAP S4HANA. Specifically, we're going to discuss access governance strategies that every organization should consider as part of their journey to S4HANA. And luckily, we just happen to have an SAP expert here on staff on our executive team here at Pathlock, who I'm really excited to introduce as today's speaker. Susan Stapleton, our VP of Partner Advisory, is an industry expert in GRC strategies. And in this role, she provides our customers and partners the guidance necessary to leverage their GRC implementations for better compliance across their entire enterprise app landscape. If you're an active member of the SAP community, you may have seen her at one of many keynotes in the SAP world. And a bit of inside information, she'll be speaking at this year's upcoming SAP Insider event as well. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Susan.
All right, thanks everybody for joining. This session is for all those stakeholders who have some role in managing SOX risks, internal controls, compliance, plus the admins and security personnel who rely on GRC to manage user risks in access control. As companies are transforming, there are many reasons to look at your access governance process, including which technology can be used to future-proof your solution going forward. Over 50% of SAP customers have deployed access control, and the use case almost everyone is using is at least the segregation of duty and critical access reporting. As the owner of access control, you've most likely built a pretty robust process for managing the user risk. But as your organization starts the planning for S4, or maybe you're well along the road of transformation, I wanted to share some things that could enable you to leverage GRC across not only S4, but your cloud solutions as well. GRC owners have the opportunity to play a pretty big role in transformation, and these options can help transform your access governance as well, because there's no way a manual or siloed approach to managing access is going to keep pace with your changing business landscape, nor provide the control environment that you need to deliver. When organizations move to S4, they're adopting on average 3 to 5 key cloud solutions, and the user access needs to be monitored in and across those systems as well. All stakeholders are impacted when these systems start getting deployed, including anybody responsible for internal controls, compliance, and especially audit. Those who now have to ensure compliance over multiple apps. These can reside on-premise, in the cloud, and most times you'll be dealing with hybrid environments. And the combination of systems are going to have high volumes of users, high volumes of data. Users could have different IDs across systems. Overall, the monitoring of access is going to become much more complex, harder than it's been in the past for just SAP. And it's almost certain that more best-of-breed solutions as they come on the market are going to be adopted by your organization. If you were at a company who deployed access control in the early days of GRC, pretty much all of the business processes end to end were executed in SAP. And most users only had access to SAP, or at least SAP was the system most controls were built around, and it was certainly always the focus of audit. And audit scrutiny is going to be moving well beyond ERP to cloud and other applications if it's not already. And this is because you have a business process that can span now 2 or more systems. Procure to pay, order to cash, all of those could have 2 to 3 applications that cover that business process. And historically, organizations have had silos in IT, with one group dedicated to SAP. You had SAP Security, SAP Center of Excellence, the SAP Basis team, and then you had another group or maybe other groups dedicated to managing everything else. With transformation, organizations have to break down these IT silos because the systems critical to the business are now fully intertwined. You have an opportunity here to kind of get GRC out of that SAP silo and leverage it to manage user risk across all of these key applications. It's likely that the primary use of GRC was to maintain your SOD and critical action rule set and report your user access risks against it. As your key business activities that are relevant to segregation of duty monitoring begin to move outside of SAP, the way you monitor those risks has to change as well. You're going to have to start monitoring user access in other systems and across systems, because continuing to monitor for all of your procure-to-pay risk in SAP, it's not going to give you an accurate picture of your risk. And limiting your oversight is going to result in audit failures, most assuredly. And one thing to note here, I would say, we are hearing and seeing that most cloud applications have some level of segregation of duties built in. Segregation of duties can be achieved via configuration or workflow options, and some newer cloud applications do not allow SOD conflicts, period. The cloud apps tend to provide SOD reporting, but it's for SODs that are in that cloud application alone. Ariba has SOD reports, and you can control a lot of access risks with how you configure cloud procurement systems like Ariba. But eliminating risks or reporting on them just for Ariba and separately monitoring S4 for your other SODs, you're going to miss those risks that are a result of users having access to process transactions in both of those apps. These new systems are going to have various authorization models. The user IDs may be different in SAP versus the cloud applications, and risks like these are exactly why you have to expand your scope of reporting. And no matter what applications are in scope, you have to have a way to normalize the data across them. And your GRC solution needs to be able to provide that mapping to tie data across these disparate systems. A lot of the cloud applications require your email address to be your user ID. And there's different ways that customers can get around that, but there are some cloud applications that is what's required. And your email address is not going to be what your ID is in ERP and other applications. I believe the most critical component of user access governance is understanding and having your business agreement on which risks are valid for your organization. I mean, your rule set is your foundation for your SOD reports. It supports your compliant provisioning of access, and it also supports building compliant roles, whether those are single roles or now job roles across systems. Access control allows you to define risks at a very high level, to create a vendor, pay a vendor, and then the rules at a very granular level underneath that. How many ways can you create a vendor and pay a vendor, and what authorizations do you need to do that? The authorization concepts of these other applications also requires the granular definition to make sure you are able to look deep enough in those authorizations when you compare them to get accurate reporting. And this level of granularity is entirely possible with your access control solution. Just, a couple of screens. When I say you already have your risks defined, I mean, your risks are really not going to change. Your auditors are going to be expecting you to manage or monitor users who have access to maintain master data and process transactions against that master data. And so at a high level, no matter where these activities move out to, these are still segregation of duty risks that internal controls and audit teams would expect you to manage. But underlying the functions of those risks, this is where now maybe your purchase orders move to Ariba, your warehouse management moves, your inventory or goods receipt could move to a warehouse management system. Your financials, your payments, your invoices, a lot of times that could stick within SAP itself. So this is where you start building underneath those high-level risks, which system those activities are carried out in, and underlying that, how do you make payment requests in the cloud solution? And it's a matter of updating your rule set, your master data within access control itself. And then if you need to look across systems, I mean, just within access control itself, you would change your analysis scope from single system to cross system, which is a standard feature of access control. And that would generate your rule sets out across Ariba and S4 or Ariba and another application that is included in that segregation of duty risk. And then anywhere you have system reporting in access control itself, that's where you'll start seeing more systems coming into your reporting scope. And this is across system risk across SAP and Ariba. And you can carry forward and do everything that you would normally be doing out of your risk reports or your ad hoc reports of access control, to assign a mitigation, to do a role removal, whatever you need to do, and manage it exactly as you manage these reports for SAP only or S4 only. So the siloed approach to managing risk, as I said, is just not going to suffice going forward. And you can't use access control to manage S4 and another GRC solution or cloud application specific reporting to manage other key systems. And this isn't the level of reporting that will provide you an adequate control, and it certainly won't pass audit muster. I'm super focused on the risk reporting because I think that's the biggest challenge that is not going to be solved in any other solution that might be coming into your identity management access governance assets. But it can be solved in GRC, and it can be solved in a solution you've already invested in and a lot of your stakeholders are already using. Just a couple more benefits before I move on, because while your risk library can be all maintained within access control, your updates to your risk are tracked, all of your audit reporting and audit trails for your entire SOD scope is maintained and auditable within access control. But in addition to SOD reporting, you can provision access to users in the cloud applications from an access control request. You can incorporate all of the systems that are connected and do one user access review campaign. So that could include users and role assignments in S4, but also in Ariba, Salesforce, Workday, even custom applications into that one UAR request for your business reviewer. And if you understand which challenges or gaps that the transformation program teams are trying to fill, there is a potential to cover some of those with your GRC solution. I know this is kind of busy, but before I close out this first topic of just understanding and identifying risk across a hybrid landscape, I wanted to share how customers can use their existing IDM integration to GRC and those existing processes, and then again, how GRC could fill some of the gaps that might be coming up in your S4 landscape. Not all customers do a preventive check in the user provisioning workflow, but if you do, and you rely on those, you know that the access request can start pretty much anywhere. It can be a trigger-based HR event, it could come from a ticketing system, it could start in identity management, or it could start in access control itself. The key here is that you're doing an inline segregation of duty check or critical access check before net new access gets provisioned to the user. And so, I think this is key that this SOD check can now include all of your systems that are in scope. This SOD check can look at SAP, Ariba, and all of those and across system risks to identify those before new access gets provisioned. The other thing we're hearing lately is that sometimes these cloud solutions are coming out fast and being adopted early, and they may not have the ability to connect to your identity management solution natively or without some level of customization. If you're using access control to provision S4 access, you can also use it to provision access to new cloud solutions like C4 Energy or Jagger or some of those that your identity management might not inherently connect to. And so if you have a gap where your teams are talking about how to provision to some systems and try to get that automated, just keep in mind that access control can fit the bill for that as well. And if you have an identity management solution, even if we provision that out of access control, we can send a closed loop notification back to identity management to say that that has been provisioned and that request can be closed. So a lot of SAP customers are SAP first for sure, but there's also a lot of non-SAP cloud solutions out there. And this is just something that we're starting to see, that procurement's moving to cloud, warehouse management is moving outside of SAP, and then core financials and a lot of your critical financially related transactions will continue to happen in S4. And if you're not monitoring across these systems, you're going to be missing a lot of key risks in your compliance reporting. So moving into the new digital enterprise, A flexible user access governance solution is required that's going to allow real-time connectivity into all of your key or SOX business systems, normalization of your security concepts, and making sure that you can interrogate authorizations at a very deep level. And if you've rolled out access control and you've relied on it to give you true SOD reports over the ABAP applications, it can be your enterprise-wide solution going forward. And you can move forward with most, probably all processes. You are already using an access control, and it can fit in and with your existing or maybe soon to be deployed identity management solution. At a minimum, it should be included in your transformation strategy to ensure correct SOD reporting across your landscape. And all systems in scope will have rules, reporting, simulation, complete audit trails for all of those connected systems in your one source of truth being access control. And if many of your governance stakeholders already use access control, they'll know where to go to get their audit trails for provisioning requests, for user access reviews, for SOD rule updates, and so on. All right. So that was really identifying and managing segregation of duties from almost what we call the can-do, the potential risk lens. But at some point in time in access control itself, you'll get to a state where you have your user risks that have been identified, and you'll get to a state where you cannot remove or reduce those risks due to maybe authorization concepts in some of the cloud solutions. They don't give you the flexibility to make role changes. What they deliver is what you have. And that can introduce SODs within those systems itself. But, you know, adding systems into access control, the complexity just continues on now to how do you manage these risks for your internal controls, compliance, and audit team. Because you can only do so much to remove access, make your role definition better where you have that possibility. But you get to this point where you have to put controls in place. And I think, you know, back in the day, we had a lot of leeway, and audit gave us a pass for a long time. As you were setting up your GRC solution, you were defining your risk, remediating your roles, removing access and swapping it around. Even going through GRC upgrades, there's a lot of reasons you could kind of keep audit scrutiny out of this process for a period of time. But that is not the case now, and they expect you to be pretty much audit ready as you go live with these solutions and as you're doing your S4 transformation program. Historically, mitigation controls for SODs could have been satisfied by sampling of transactions, maybe assigning key controls to the user SOD risk, and still too often customers are being found that have non-existent controls itself, but a lot of times audit is identifying a lack of effective controls over user risk. I don't think the key controls are an adequate control going forward. Non-existent controls, definitely a no. And even the sampling is not necessarily identifying actual fraudulent activity because it's not looking at enough of the transactions. And keep in mind, a lot of that control activity that customers and organizations were failing on, a lot of times that was just for risks that were within SAP itself. So now you start adding in additional applications into this scope and monitoring across those, and it just becomes that much more difficult. And control processes vary organization by organization. Most organizations have managed user risk through manual control testing. And how often they're performed, by who? I mean, does the business own this monitoring of what users are doing, or is it centralized in an internal control team? The scope of the control, whether it's looking at 100% of the transactions or it's a sample approach. Controls also might be more process-related versus user-related. So a user risk identified that is something like a create vendor and pay a vendor might be controlled via vendor controls or controls over payment. But those controls continue to miss the risk at the user level and correlating transactional events back to the user. It can allow inappropriate user behavior and even fraud to go undetected over long periods of time. Whatever types of controls are in place prior to the move to S4, I do also want to make sure everybody's aware that those controls all need to be redeveloped. So if you've developed custom queries, custom reports for SODs in ECC, all of that data that's pulled down into your queries and custom reports are now in the new optimized table structure. So if you've done this in the past, you'll have to redo all of those, which is no small level of effort. And when I talk about transforming controls, I mean, if you can automate this and deliver a very consistent way to solve this challenge, it's a good way to, add a lot of value to the S4 transformation program, because it will be nearly impossible to monitor risk, even if you sample, when the activities for a single business process start to cross these applications, and the users who have SODs have access to multiple systems where they're carrying out those transactions. The number of people, amount of time, and redundant activities to monitor across these systems is going to be massive. And audit expectations, like I said, are that organizations prove effective and timely controls over these risks, and they're not going to give a lot of leeway or a lot of time before they expect those controls to be in place. This is our can do versus did do slide, and I just want to talk about what comes out of the access control solution. It is a reporting of users who have risks that have the ability to carry out the transactions. They can maintain suppliers and process supplier invoices. They can create purchase orders and process payments. So these are the kinds of risk reports that will come out of access control, and typically your business owners or your internal control team could be spending a lot of time setting up manual controls, monitoring these maybe quarterly or monthly or twice a year to understand that there are controls in place, someone's monitoring those controls, and that you can prove it to audit when they come around. Now, these controls are being run over transactions that are happening in the business application. And with continuous control monitoring across these, you can look at 100% of the transactions and correlate them through a series of intelligent linkages and execution sequences that will tie the transactional activity together, that will tell the business or internal controls when the same user created a vendor and processed an invoice to that same vendor. How many users did that out of the 208 who could do? 4 users did process transactions, 1,000 transactions. And then we can also associate a dollar value with those, because these are invoices, scrapping of material, payments to customers, credit memos. There are dollar values associated with almost every segregation of duty event, and that can give you a much different picture of what's happening in your environment, and you can start looking at transaction or segregation of duty risk through a different lens. You can move from a potential theoretical risk into material risk in what's actually happening. And a lot of times we do have customers run these controls and they might get 0 hits, hard hits, month over month over month. But that 1 month where 2 or 3 users do process a purchase order and make a payment for that same purchase order, it could be $5 million that pops up that you would have no insight into if you're manually sampling maybe 3% of 22 million transactions. There are a lot of things that are going to go through the gaps. And 22 million transactions in 1 quarter of purchase orders and payments is just a tremendous amount of data to get through, even if you wanted to, dump down data from queries or something else. So this is really just talking about utilizing CCM specifically for segregation of duties to really get you to, continuous control monitoring and really making this a much more efficient and effective process. So what we do in the first piece is connect to business applications and bring authorization data across. In this aspect of CCMs, we're actually looking at your transactional systems and cloud systems and looking at transactional data and monitoring 100% of the users, the risks, and the transactions in the systems that are in your scope. And you can run this at any frequency. I mean, you can definitely produce exceptions only, which really helps the business focus on what matters. You can run these controls at any level of frequency you want. If you wanted to run the controls every month or even every week, you could definitely do that because you don't have all of that manual resource-intensive dumping down of data from multiple systems. When you automate a control, it will definitely be deemed effective by your auditors, and all of the audit proof is stored online. And what that means is that we're fetching data from the systems where the transactions are being processed. We're correlating data and surfacing it online to be reviewed and signed off on. And none of the data can be manipulated, deleted. You're not dealing with SharePoint and a bunch of Excel or database solutions that are offline to do this work for you. It's all online and it's all auditable. I just wanted to provide a screenshot of the level of data that we report, because when we talk about automated mitigation or transaction monitoring, a lot of times people think we mean that usage level, just reporting to users who have processed both transactions on both sides of the SOD. We're actually reporting transactional events correlated to one line for every SOD that's taken place. So this is a segregation of duty where the same user received goods into the warehouse and then processed an invoice for the same goods that they received. And so you would see the invoice number, the amount of that invoice, the document number of the goods received into the warehouse, and so on, all correlated into one line. And then you see here the amount of the transaction. And this is what allows us to provide you analytics as to what the financial exposure related to segregation of duty events it means to you as a company. Or it's just a much better way to look at it from 500 users with potential risk to actual users processing transactions and what those risks mean to you. This is an example of one of our customers' landscapes, and I like it just to kind of talk through how much value and streamlining automation can bring to you. So this is a customer that's been running access control for a long time. And not only are they running segregation of duty analysis against SAP, but they're also running it against JD Edwards. And then both organizations that run either SAP or JD Edwards as their core ERP, they all run their procurement through Ariba. So in access control itself, they're monitoring SAP and Ariba risk and JD Edwards and Ariba risk. And then they're using CCM to monitor segregation of duty material events across SAP and Ariba, JD Edwards and Ariba. So when those hard hit transactions or material violations occur, we pick up the user's manager from the virtual directory. We kick out an email to that manager. They receive an email notification that brings them to their work list. They review the transactions, move them from open to closed or requires more investigation. And that's their mitigation control. And you can see how many manual activities from an IT, internal controls, and compliance perspective can be pulled out of this just by letting the software do all of the work for you. And when you have this centralized and a consistent repository for reporting all of these exceptions and actioning them, another real benefit is how you can view those risks. And it's being able to roll up all of the SOD events by business process, by risk, by users, and then view them location by location, business unit by business unit, or organization-wide, so that you can monitor segregation of duty activity time, trending over time. So there's a lot of information that you can gain from automating those activities. So not only can you include more systems into your access governance scope, you can definitely simplify the process, and you can streamline it and remove a ton of the manual resources that are required to support that, and make this an easier process for your stakeholders. And it's going to give you that confidence level over your risk and controls, even if you just start this out for SAP S4 as you start rolling out your S4 transformation program. But as you bring on other cloud applications, doing some of your key business systems or business processes, those can be rolled right in line as well and reported out to the business. All right, moving into my last topic. I think the second most deployed functionality of access control would have been firefighting or emergency access management. And as these new cloud solutions start getting deployed, there are a few of them that do not have good audit logging or gives you the ability to, really restrict what access users are able to do through firefighting. One example is Ariba. Ariba is you get the roles that cloud solution provides to you, and you really can't make changes to them. And one of those roles is an administrator role. And that role gives everybody keys to the kingdom who gets access to that. And so they can create users, create purchase orders, approve purchase orders. They could change critical configuration. They have absolute, complete ability to do anything. And one of the things that auditors are asking to see for Ariba are when someone gets an admin role, you need to prove that they did not create a user. They did not create a purchase order. They did not change critical configurations, payment data, pricing details, any of that kind of stuff. And that's basically impossible to do in the one massive audit log that particular cloud solution puts out. So these are kinds of things that I think the transformation teams and also app owners, who is the team that owns Coupa or Workday or Ariba, they might be already noticing that they're going to have the ability to provide some better controls over some of the role assignments that they're going to have to give. If you're using Firefighter and GRC, you're probably familiar with this end-to-end process of being able to request access, provision access, monitor what those users are doing while they have excessive or access that's coming through their ID, and then the detailed audit logging. And while everything else that we talked about from an SOD reporting perspective can be delivered through the access control UI, this is one where access control is very ABAP-centric for Firefighter. So there would be a separate UI for the admin and the log reviews, but the firefighters could come into access control, request a firefight role or ID through access control to one of these other cloud solutions, and that can be provisioned and time-stamped and indated, to remove that access on a timely basis. The admin setting up the firefight IDs and the owners of the IDs, as well as the log review, that would be done in a separate UI. But that separate UI is a Fiori-based UI, and it would be for all of the non-ABAP systems. So you would have one additional firefight kind of cockpit where you set up your success factors firefighters, your JD Edwards Concur, whatever those are, and then you would be able to monitor what users are doing when they get firefight access to the cloud solution. And I showed you that transaction monitoring before that really supports automated controls for SODs, but it's that same concept of going in and fetching very granular transactional details that can provide really good audit logs for what users are doing in success factors, what they've done in Ariba. And you can also call out that you only want to pull to the top things that maybe your auditors are concerned about, or that the business owner really wants to make sure that they're monitoring changes for. And all of this, again, is, your complete audit trail would be online, including that audit log and review, which satisfies, audit concerns over privileged access management. So I guess, when I'm thinking about governance, risk, and compliance in the SAP solutions, a lot of it, I focus on user access governance, and hopefully, you can see some ways here to manage user SODs across systems, mitigate risk across systems, and manage your firefighters or your super users across systems. That gives you that automated approach, kind of a streamlined way, and really following GRC processes that you're probably already using. I would just say, wrapping up, that a couple of takeaways I hope you kind of think about and I can leave you with. If you're an owner of governance, risk, and compliance from SAP and you're not involved in transformation planning yet, now is the time to raise your hand and get involved. You may have a pretty large team of folks that are supporting governance, risk, and compliance. But if your group has been siloed in IT to just managing SAP security, SAP risk, SAP, ERP, and controls, there's a good chance others throughout the business may not know you've got processes, procedures, business users, and stakeholders already using a solution that can be extended to cover all of your GRC needs across any business application that's coming into scope. And I think it's good to just listen for gaps the project team might be talking about. Do they have super user access they need to audit or provide audit trails for? Is there one or more systems that they don't know how to automate the provisioning for that you could do throughout or do with the access control solution? So anyway, I think I'm going to wrap it up here, but hopefully you were able to see some options for extending your GRC application into your upcoming transformation journey and leverage your investment and your team's knowledge of GRC to provide solutions for the new transformation scope of applications that's going to be coming your way.
Thanks, Susan. That was a fantastic piece of thought leadership on access governance and SAP. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left for Q&A, so go ahead and use the Q&A interface in GoToWebinar to ask your questions. And luckily, Susan has agreed to stick around and answer some questions for us.